And good morning. How's everyone doing today? Sure is good to see you. Thank you very much for joining me today. Well, let me check and make sure everything's going all right on my broadcast. How's my sound coming through? Hopefully you can hear me well enough. I see we have a couple of people on the broadcast. Go ahead and check in and say hello. How's everybody doing? I hope everybody can see me. Fantastic. Who do we have in the audience this morning? Thanks for coming. All right. Hello, NSP. Thanks for coming this morning. It's great to have you. It's great to have you. We're going to be talking about personality today. Now, one of the fundamental parts of successful uh, um, functioning as a human being is understanding your personality, understanding other people's personality, and how those personalities work together. So what we're going to do this week is we're going to talk a little bit about how personality is formed. We're going to take a personality test, and my goal for you this week is to understand how personality tests work, so that you can learn more from the personality tests that you have in your world. Let's see. So everything's going well with the broadcast, it looks like. Okay. Hi, Iris. Thanks for coming. Good to see you. Welcome, Iris. All right. Give a round of applause to Iris for showing up today. Fantastic. So today we're going to talk about how personality is formed. If you come to webinar on Thursday night, we're going to talk about how personality tests are made. And your assignment this week is going to be a little bit about how personality is formed, and it's going to be a little bit about the personality test that you take. So you're not going to want to miss Thursday night's webinar at 8 p.m. So you won't want to miss being there Thursday night at 8 p.m. Let's go ahead and get started if we should. Chapter 2, Theories of Personality. Like I suggested, almost every theory of well-being is going to discuss the impact that personality has on our functioning, on our emotional functioning, on our intellectual productivity. Personality is a very important aspect of who you are as a human being. And so this book chooses to start by talking to you a little bit about personality, and that's what we're going to talk about today, okay? Now, here's the goal of this week's class. We're going to discuss what personality is, kind of give you a general description of what personality is, and then we're going to talk about two theories that describe where our personality comes from, a psychodynamic model and a humanistic model. And we're going to talk a little bit about Sigmund Freud and his defense mechanisms. Then we're going to talk about acceptance, conditional positive regard, and unconditional positive regard, and why it's important to feel accepted all of the time. Then we're going to talk about personality tests. We're going to talk about the properties of personality tests, reliability, validity, norms, and standardization. And I'm actually going to have you take examples of self-report and projective personality tests so that you will know the difference between these two types of personality tests. Do we have any questions at this point? I see we have a couple of more people wandering into the broadcast. If you logged in with your Google password, you can type in the chat bar. Go ahead and tell me hello. Hi, Courtney. Good to see you. Thanks for coming today. Really appreciate you making time to come have live lecture with me. Always works better when you've got people to talk to and be around. I think the social aspect of education is probably one of the most important parts of it. So again, thank you for coming, Courtney. Anybody else in the classroom want to check in? All right. Now, so let's talk about what exactly do we mean when we're talking about personality. Personality is you, my friend, your individual, unique, and consistent pattern of responses to environmental stimulation. It's the way you respond. So, Courtney, Iris, if we were to see somebody running naked down the street in front of us, all three of us would respond differently to that one stimulus, right? Uh, we would do something different. We would say something different. We might think something different. The difference in our responses to that stimulation represents personality. And personality develops into a very stable pattern of behavior. Personality is thought to be demonstrated by the way you act, by the way you think, and by the way you feel. All right. So today we're going to talk about where personality comes from, and on Thursday we're going to talk about how to measure personality. And I'm going to ask you to consider the question this week: who are you? What kind of person are you? I didn't realize that I had an angry personality until I was 35 years old. I had to be confronted with personality testing evidence and the words of people who knew me best before I realized that I was the problem and it wasn't the world with the problem, right? I realized Chris Roddenberry was the butthead. So, who are you? I hope we can figure out who you are this week. Okay. Now, today we're going to talk a little bit about how personalities develop. Let's say we might ask the question, why do people act the way they do? This was the question that started Sigmund Freud, the famous psychologist. He's probably the most famous, not the most important, but he is definitely the most famous of all psychologists. You know why? Because he talked a lot about sex. And everybody knows that sex is the most popular thing going on. So his theories had a lot of sex in them. And he was the first person to really ask the question, where does your adult personality come from? Now, mostly he was working with people who had psychological disorders. He was a therapist working in Vienna, Austria. Vienna, Germany. I can't believe I said that. Vienna, Austria. And he was seeing people who came to his office who were having troubles. And he began to build an idea that the personality was really a very conflicted thing, that underneath the surface of everybody, these conflicts were going on. People were choosing between alternatives. They wanted to do this, but they had to do this. And he believed that personality was really built from the conflict that people experienced throughout their life. And so he developed the idea of the psychodynamic theory of personality. According to him, and according to these psychologists, your personality develops as you try to manage your desires and your basic needs in a world that doesn't always meet them. All right. And furthermore, these psychologists argue that when the environment doesn't meet our needs, sometimes it can cause personality problems. Okay. Now, here's the deal. We all have these instinctual needs. They drive us. You know what? We're not even really aware of them sometimes. Some of you have the need to be accepted. We all have the need to be accepted and loved, right? We all have the need to feel good about ourselves. We all have the need to feel powerful. So, psychodynamic theories would all argue that we all have one or more of these instincts driving us, and early childhood experiences when these instincts, especially when these instincts are frustrated, uh, can really affect our personality. So, did any of you ever have something really embarrassing and humiliating happen early in your life that really shaped the way you are? Uh, did anybody take advantage of you and make you feel bad? Was there something you really needed, some acceptance you wanted? Did you want people to like you? And maybe they didn't make you feel as accepted as you wanted. I was always a really short guy, and I was very, very worried about people judging me because I was very short. And so I had this need to feel powerful and tall. And so I started a lot of trouble as a kid trying to compensate for my lack of height by being tough and angry. So, in a sense, I was fitting this psychodynamic model. I had this need to feel as good as everybody else, But at the same time, my short height and the way people looked at me sort of made me feel like I wasn't as powerful and as accepted as I should have been. And so I had this conflict going on in my personality. Uh, did any of you have something like that going on in your life? So, according to Sigmund Freud and the psychodynamic psychologist, this is what personality is all about. All of us are born with a need, if you will, and this need is sometimes met and sometimes not met. And it's the conflict between this unconscious need, okay, that we're not aware of, and our conscious personality, our ego, which manages this need that we have. If you look over here on the left, this is the typical Freudian model. Now, don't worry so much about what the id, the superego, and the ego is. All I want you to understand from this model is that a lot of our personality is unconscious to us. It drives us because we have needs. So these are these unconscious needs. And at the very top, where Freud called the ego, you might call that your conscious awareness. That's how you respond to all these needs that are bubbling below the surface. And he argued that when people grow up, sometimes this this conflict that's brewing under the surface really shapes our personality. Now, here's the deal. Um, Freud, one of the things that's important about Freud that we're going to talk about that I want you to be familiar with is this idea of defense mechanisms. Now, I haven't talked in your book, they're going to talk a little bit about Freud's specific theory. They're going to talk a little bit about Alfred Adler's specific theory. Here's the deal, these theories really have fallen out of favor and they're not really seen as the most accurate way of describing how a young person's personality develops over the course of their life. A lot of the psychodynamic theory has been pushed to the wayside and just shown that it's not a correct way of thinking about personality. However, what has continued to exist until the modern era is the idea of defense mechanisms that was identified and described first by Sigmund Freud. This is the only part, really, or the main part of psychodynamic theory that you're going to see in modern psychology. Has anyone ever accused you of being defensive? Does anybody know what? Has anybody ever heard that phrase before? Oh, you're just being defensive. Courtney, Irez, NSP, have any of you heard that term? If you have, go ahead and type in the chat bar and tell me what you think it means. Because what that person is doing is suggesting that you are exhibiting a Freudian defense mechanism. Now, here's the deal. The specifics of how conflict moves around the body and affects your specific personality styles, we're not going to worry about. One of the things that I do want you to understand is that a lot of times people have conflicts that are brewing down beneath them that bother them so bad that these people have to find a way to hide themselves from the anxiety caused by their feelings. Okay, so Freud suggested that sometimes people have fears or desires, these instinctual drives that are so strong that they can't manage those feelings normally. And so, what these people do is they adopt mechanisms for redirecting the energy created by these defense mechanisms. So, for example, I might have been really embarrassed by something that my mom told me about being a short person when I was a little kid, and it embarrassed me so bad. Maybe she took me to the toddler section when I was 5 years old and just said, "Oh, you're so small, you have to wear these baby clothes." And she might have laughed in front of her friends, and that might have made me feel so bad inside and angry, but I can't show that to my mom. But I've got this feeling that's bubbling down, this anger and embarrassment about that. So what I might do is I might choose to repress those feelings. Anybody ever heard the term repression? What I might do is forget how bad that hurt my feelings. I might actually forget that event. If I do that, that's what's known as repressing the memory. That's actually a Freudian defense mechanism. So we know sometimes things happen to people that are so bad, so embarrassing early in their life that they actually forget these events. It's better if they don't remember these events. Freud argued that's a way to protect yourself from the anxiety created by this emotion. However, the anxiety is still underneath there. It's still bubbling and it's still affecting your behavior. And so Freud thought that people would then redirect this energy in different ways. Has anybody ever accused, have any of you ever had a romantic partner accuse you of cheating on them, and then it turned out that that person was cheating on you? Has anybody ever accused you of stealing, and it turns out they were the one that was stealing? That's what's known as projecting your desires on another person. I feel badly about cheating on you. And so, what I'm going to do, and that anxiety from that comes up, and I have to deal with it. And so, what I do is I accuse you of cheating. What I'm really doing is pointing the finger at myself, but I can't deal with that. I can't actually do that directly. So, I point my finger at you. Hi, Timothy. Nice to see you. What we're talking about right now is where personality comes from. And I suggested in the psychodynamic theory of personality, what they argue is that human beings have these instinctual needs or desires. And as we grow up, the world sometimes doesn't meet these needs or desires. And this causes us to feel conflict, and it affects the way our personality develops. So we all have a need to be loved and accepted, but some of us aren't accepted, don't have feelings of acceptance when we're young kids. This is affects your personality. Some of us have a need to feel powerful, but sometimes our parents make us feel impotent and empower and not powerful at all, and that affects our personality when we grow up. Timothy, Freud thought that everybody needed sexual gratification, but some of us are made to feel like our need for sex is dirty or weird or sick, and that affects how we turn out as adults. So, one theory of where personality comes from is that people have needs, and personality comes from when our needs meet the world that either fulfills our needs or doesn't fulfill our needs. And Timothy, I suggested that while that I'm not talking about the specifics of psychodynamic theories, because largely the details of those theories aren't accepted as modern science anymore. But one of the things that does exist from psychodynamic theory is this idea that people have strategies for hiding feelings that make them anxious from themselves. So people repress feelings and memories that they have. People project their bad feelings onto other people. Sometimes when people have a desire, they will move the object of the desire from something unsafe to something safe. Sometimes people pretend to be homophobic and say negative things about homosexual people, and you find out later that that person actually had homosexual feelings themselves, and you ask yourself, why did they do that? Well, they were using reaction formation. They were pretending to be what they weren't, and their anger was sort of a way of dealing with the anger that they had at themselves. And so the idea is, what I want you folks to understand is that there are things that you're not facing. There are things that none of us face because they make us feel embarrassed, because they hurt our feelings, because they go back to things that happened early in our life. One of the ways in which we can develop as human beings is to find out where these defensive blocks are in our personalities and deal with the emotions uh, that resulted. Have any of you ever gone to psychotherapy and had a therapist talk about something difficult that happened early in your life? A bad memory and the shame and embarrassment. If you have, you had a little bit of psychodynamic therapy. Your psychologist is trying to deal with the block, the repressed feelings, the defensive feelings that occurred as a result of that traumatic event in your life. Okay. So that's an important thing to know about ourselves as we try to evolve into better versions of who we are. Now, the according to the psychodynamic people, your personality is really always about conflict. You always have some desire, some sort of need, and this need is always in conflict with the environment. This is going to be different than the humanistic perspective on personality. So, some people, in a sense, really argue, you know what? If you just let people be who they are, if you just don't judge people, if you just give people love and nurturance, people will grow into normal, healthy adults. According to the psychodynamic people, we've all got something that bothers us in the back of our mind. But the humanist said it doesn't have to be that way. If you bring your child up and just accept your child for who they are, that child will grow into a normal, healthy adult. Now, if any of you out there in this broadcast are having problems right now in your adult life, if you're sad, if you're depressed, if you're anxious, the humanist would say it's because your parents didn't give you what we'll call unconditional positive regard. Your parents put conditions on their acceptance of you. Clean your room or you're a bad kid. Make good grades or I'm not going to think you're a nice child. Just remember right down here. Just remember, son, it doesn't matter whether you win or lose unless you want daddy's love. So most of us, they argue, grow up in this world right here where the people we want to love us more than anything in the world put conditions on the love that they're going to give us. He argues this, the humanists argue that this is the problem with life today. They argue that instead, if we just bring people up and accept them for who they are, what they like to do, what they want to do, whatever they want to be, that people will grow into a healthy, happy human being. He called this natural desire, this natural tendency, self actualization. I don't know if any of you have ever heard the term of being self actualized. This comes from the humanists. This means growing into what you were meant to grow into. Each and every one of you. Now, I don't have to, I could be dramatic and say that each and every one of you has a destiny, right? But in a sense, each and every one of you has that thing that you've always wanted, that you want to be, that makes you feel who you feel your best. For me, I always wanted to be around books and learning and ideas. From the time I was a kid, all I wanted to do was read books and be a college professor. I remember telling my mom when I was 5 years old that I wanted to be a doctor, and my mom used to practice naming the bones and the muscles with me. And all I ever wanted to be was just some sort of nerdy egghead. What exactly is it that you wanted to grow into? What is it? You know what I mean? Are you artistic? Are you business oriented? Are you whatever? We each have an actualizing, a self actualizing tendency, which will happen in the absence of people telling you not to do what you want to do. Here's a good example. I had a cousin. I remember this kid from the we grew up back in the 70s and 80s when we called it high fidelity, high fi. we all had these big crazy stereo systems, right? But my cousin Ed loved hi-fi systems, and all he wanted to do was play with speakers and radios and stereos and stuff like that. But his mom discouraged him from doing that, and she made him go to college, and he failed out of college. And she made him work with his dad as a car salesman. He failed out as that. She then helped him get a business selling sandwiches. He failed out at that, and he just never could be, find a niche to success. And then in the 90s, when home audio came around and people were wiring their house for home audio, he got a job working as a home audio installer and actually finally realized his true happiness and and he's now a very successful home audio installer and salesman and really is a happy productive person. And here's the problem: if his parents had let him be what he wanted to be as a high school kid, right, he'd have found success much earlier. But his parents, his mom specifically, Ed's mom, told him that she didn't value what it was he valued. They pushed him into something else. Have any of you ever been pushed by your parents to be something that you didn't want to be? My dad wanted me to join the military. And no offense against the military, I just don't play well in a group setting. I don't march, and I don't like to be cold or work as a big group. I'm more of a loner kind of guy. And my dad really pushed for that. And he always was sort of judging me, right? But that's not what I wanted to be. And so according to the to the uh, to the humanist perspective, most of our problem is because people haven't accepted us for what we are, what we think, what we value, right? So, how many of you grew up in a world where your parents had high expectations for what you needed to be? How many of you have ever disappointed your parents and felt how bad that feels? Do you folks know the pain of disappointing your parents? This is what happens when your parents set up conditions of worth, right? You shouldn't be able to, according to the humanists, you shouldn't be able to feel that way in front of your parents because your parents shouldn't make you feel like you have to do anything to be loved. But all of us have felt the shame of embarrassing our parents, right? And so, according to his, according to this guy named Carl Rogers was really a hippy dippy kind of psychologist. Actually, if you go back and look at he's there are actually old videos on YouTube of this guy Carl Rogers, and he represents this stereotype that everybody laughs about when they talk about sort of those touchy feely psychologist, because he is the most touchy feely psychologist that you will ever meet. And when you hear him talk, he has this really nice voice, and he talks about accepting and feeling good and valuing you and prizing people. He's sort of this stereotypical touchy feely psychologist that they make fun of. And he developed this sort of this humanistic belief, and he had what he called the person-centered approach. If you came into therapy with Carl Rogers, his job was to provide you with 100 total percent acceptance. Now, you might do something. He's not. If you come in and tell him you killed somebody, he's not going to tell you that it's okay to kill somebody. But what he's going to do is he's going to tell you, he's going to try to understand the chain of events that brought you to that point. Now, that's an extreme example, but all of us have had feelings for which we feel judged. When you came into his therapy, he would accept you conditionally for who you are. According to this guy, he argued, here's the deal, here's what happens in our personality. Individuals start out with a self concept. This is who I am, right? And this is the self, this is who I really want to be, and this is who the world wants me to be. Now, what happens is if we're healthy and happy, uh, the world will want us to be exactly what we are. But let's say you grow up and you know deep down inside uh, that maybe you might not be heterosexual, but you know that your parents don't accept homosexual people, but you are homosexual. And so what happens is you have to make this alter ego, this fake sense of yourself. And this fake self may start to differ from who you really are, right? So, what if you truly are homosexual, but you grew up in the deep South in the 1970s when I did? And if you were not allowed to tell anybody at all who you were. So, you had to build this self that was different from who you really were, right? Or maybe you were truly artistic inside, but your parents only, maybe you had those tiger mom kind of parents that only wanted you to do math and science, but you really wanted to write and do poetry. And so what happens is you have to build a picture of yourself that people think of you that is not really who you are. And you start to get what he called incongruence in your personality. There's the personality that I show the world, and that there's the personality that I am inside. And what he argued was that it was this incongruence which leads to people's neurotic feelings. If you're depressed, if you're anxious, if you're having psychological problems, it's because of this incongruency between the true you and the you that you build and show to people so that they will accept you. And so, if you would go to Carl Rogers, he would bring you into his office, and he would try to help you find a way to accept yourself, to find a sense of self acceptance. Now, Carl Rogers also believed in defense mechanisms and defensive behavior. But if you look, like I showed you, if you look down here at this picture, he argued that this defensive behavior occurred as a result of the anxiety from when we have incongruence in our personality. Okay. Hi, Emma. Thanks for coming in. We're talking a little bit about what causes us to develop the personalities that we have. So here's the deal. I want you folks to think about this. These are two theories on, and go read the details, the individual details about Alfred Adler, Sigmund Freud, and the details of Carl Rogers. But here's sort of two ideas on personality. Number one, personality is conflict. Who you are as an adult is built on this unavoidable conflict that occurs because all human beings are built with drive systems, with instinctual needs, and that none of us are getting our needs fully met. Okay. And so the reason that people seem so conflicted, the reason that people have so many things going on under the surface, the reason that you find out so many seedy things about people and that we all have secrets is because people are trying to manage these drives that sometimes don't fit in with the rest of the world. That's one theory of personality. On the other hand, in this book, we might say that really, if people just let us grow up into the persons we wanted to be, uh, we would be uh, we would be happy adults. So the question is, which of these viewpoints do you think is a more accurate representation of why people do the things they do as adults? Are people basically twisted and driven by desire deep down inside? Or are people just not being accepted for who they are as adults? Two different viewpoints on where personality comes from. Ah, let's see. Okay. So, here's the deal. Um, Psychodynamic, and actually, I should have written psychodynamic and humanistic theories. I didn't tell you about any of the details of these theories because these theories don't really aren't testable. They're poor testable. They have poor testability. They're vague, difficult to measure. The evidence doesn't seem to line up with some of the more specific claims made by these theories. And so this is why I didn't even talk to you about the details of these theories. And I don't understand why they do that in the textbook. They give you a detailed explanation of how personality develops as described by Freud, and then they tell you at the end that the details don't really support his theory. That kind of blows my mind. So these theories really, they're just good ways of thinking about how human beings might develop. So here's the deal. What are useful about these theories? Why do you bother telling us about them, Chris, if they do have these poor testable claims? Here's the thing. The evidence does suggest that there are things going on underneath the surface of your awareness that influence your behavior. The one insight that Freud came up with that you will see running through the psychodynamic and humanist perspective, and that I want you to understand, is that things that we are not aware of affect how we behave and affect our adult personalities. Why is that important? Because you need to always, in order for you to get over some of the biggest problems that you have in your life, you're going to have to learn how to deal with these things that you don't want to think about, okay? You might have to talk to that therapist about the event that happened when you were a child or how you're feeling now. There are things that we are unwilling to admit that do affect us as adults. I think the humanists and the psychodynamic people are right, and I think that's an insight that you ought to take in as a life lessons, right? Number two, that sometimes these things cause conflicts. If you're fighting in your life, if you're having marital problems, if you're having other kinds of conflict, this might be the root of why you are you might be as a result of these unconscious forces. And it's important for you to look back on the things that happened to you as a child. Those are the formative years, and so sometimes it's important for us to go back and deal with these childhood events. And as I suggested to you, clinical psychology right now does accept the notion of defensive behavior, people trying to hide themselves from the anxiety and the bad feelings caused by this conflict that they feel in their personality. So while the psychodynamic and humanist people, their specific theories haven't been accepted. This idea that there are things going on under the surface that you need to deal with uh, definitely is a legitimate thing, and it's something that you should use as a part of the insight process in helping yourself evolve as a human being. All right. And we're going to continue to talk over this semester about this thing called the self concept, who you are, your feelings of strength, your feelings of powerlessness. And we're going to talk about some of these concepts that were brought up by the psychodynamic psychologists, but we're going to talk about them in the context of modern psychological language. All right. So that's sort of what I want you to understand about where personality comes from. And as you move forward, having taken this class, Psychology for Plumbers, as I call it, Emma, Timothy, Courtney, Irez, whoever's in here still right now, what I want you to do is to be willing to try and get underneath the surface and try to really break, if you want to break those difficult and problematic adult personality patterns of adult personality and patterns of adult behavior and those destructive things that you do, you're going to have to go under the surface and deal with some things that you don't want to deal with. All right. So let's see. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about personality testing. We're going to run out of time, so I'm not going to have time to do all of this. But what we're going to do on Thursday night, folks, is we are going to talk about how to test personality. You are going to run into lots and lots of tests that call themselves personality tests throughout your adult life. What I want you to understand is what makes a good personality test. How do you tell a good personality test from a bad personality test? We're going to talk about the qualities of personality tests. And then I'm going to try to help you understand the difference between the two basic types of personality tests, self-report tests and projective personality tests. So what I want you also to gain from having completed chapter 2 is an ability in your future life to evaluate the tests, the personality tests that you are going to come across in your adult life. Now, also, as a part of learning this, we're going to take what I believe to be the most valid and reliable online test of personality in existence, the IPIP-NEO, the one that you've got in your course materials this week. And this test is going to give you a little bit of insight into your adult functioning. This is actually the test I took at 35 that led me to discover that I am a very neurotic person. What does it mean to be neurotic, you say? Well, neurotic people experience two negative emotions more than other people: anger and anxiety. Are you a person who's always yelling and getting angry at people and getting in arguments? You're neurotic. You're an angry, neurotic person. Are you the kind of person that's always worried about the future, worried about the past, worried about what people are thinking about, worried about money, this and that? You're a worrier. You're full of anxiety. You're an anxious neurotic. I happen to be an angry and anxious neurotic. I'm just like that. I didn't even realize that about myself until I was 35 years old. I took this test. I got the results and laughed at them because they were so ridiculous. I showed these results to my wife, and she said, that is the most accurate description of you ever. And I sat down and I thought about it, and I went back over my life, and I realized that that number that said that I was more neurotic than 75% of the population was actually true. And in the last 15 years, I've begun to deal with my anger problems. I'm still kind of an angry guy, but I am much better than I was at 35. And it all occurred because I took this test and discovered who I am. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this test and we're going to learn about all the properties of tests. So if you'll remember from the first part of this class, I suggested to you that personality is an individual's constellation of consistent behavioral traits. It's the way you think, the way you feel, and the way you behave. You can think of a personality trait as a durable disposition to behave, think, or feel a particular way in a variety of situations. It is a durable disposition to behave. And by behave, I mean behave, to think about behaving, or to feel about behaving. It's a durable disposition to behave in a particular way in a variety of situations. What are some examples of trait? Well, people have described me as being moody. People have described me as being impulsive. And sometimes, thank goodness, people describe me as being friendly as well. These are durable ways in which I behave in social situations. What is what is what is your personality traits? What personality traits describe you? Now, any psychological test is just a standardized measure of a sample of a person's behavior and style. You know what? Actually, this is a crappy. I'm going to change that after class. That's a crappy definition. But a personality test is any standardized measure of something about a human being. Now, I can ask you about and you know what? Those personality tests can measure single traits. Did you know there's an anxiety test? There's a depression personality test. right? There's a narcissistic personality test that measures individual personality traits, or sometimes we can give you a personality test that measures all of your personality traits. The one that you're taking this week is an omnibus test. It measures all of the 5 personality traits, right? So there are 2 main types of personality tests, all right? Okay, now the first are self-report inventories where I directly ask you to describe yourself. Okay, so hopefully Timmy's still in here. Timmy, how extroverted are you on a scale of 1 to 10? Timmy, how agreeable are you on a scale of 1 to 10? With 1 being very not extroverted at all and 10 being very extroverted. With 1 being not agreeable at all and 10 being incredibly agreeable. How do you rate yourself on a scale? Okay, if I ask Timmy that way, that's what's known as a self-report inventory. And in fact, most of the tests that you are going to take are going to be what we call self-report inventories. And this is simply a personality test that asks you to describe yourself using a series of direct questions about your characteristic behaviors. Okay. On the other hand, I could measure your personality by giving you a situation and watching how you interact that situation. And I can then try to guess your personality. So I'll give you a situation, let you project your personality into that situation in the way you behave. And then I guess your personality based upon how you respond. Okay. Now, let's see. Let me move up here. Boom. Okay, so a self-report test of personality just asks the test taker directly about their personality. If you look over here, this is an example of what your book calls the 16 personality factor questionnaire. There's actually a ton of personality tests. This is the 16 PF developed by a fellow named Raymond Cattell and his colleagues. And he measures 16 basic dimensions of personalities he called source traits. Don't learn these, okay? Don't learn these. But you'll notice that this person right here is evaluated on all these traits. So if you look, they're in the middle between reserved and outgoing. But if you move down to, you'll notice that they're more emotionally stable than they are affected by feelings. But then if you go down to more, you'll notice that the person is probably just about as serious as they are happy-go-lucky. But if you go down, you'll notice that this person is way more tough-minded than they are sensitive. And each of these dots represents where this person falls between 2 averages based upon their answering direct questions. This is what's known as the 16 PF. Now, the test that I had you take is one that's based on the NEO inventory, designed to measure the big 5 personality traits. Now, this is actually the most popular test of personality, and this is the best one online. So this is one we're going to focus on. But the NEO inventory that you're going to take this week measures big 5 personality traits. Your personality is an ocean. It is openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism. Personality is an ocean. Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism. You'll have to know those for the final exam. Remember, I told you last week in your lecture that you need to use mnemonics in order to remember things. Personality is an ocean. What's the most popular test of personality? It says your personality is an ocean. Openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism. Okay, you're going to take a test this week and it's going to measure you, and it's basically going to give you sort of a statistical measure that looks a lot like the 16 FPF. Okay, and what it's going to do, it's going to give you a number somewhere between 0 and 99. And that number represents how you compare to the rest of the population. So if you score a 50 on extroversion like I did, that means you're more extroverted than 50% of the population of 53-year-old men, which also means I'm less extroverted than 50% of the population of 53-year-old men. I happen to score 79 on openness to experience. That means I'm more open minded than 79% of men, my open to experience. I'm more open to experience than 79% of American men who are 53 years of age. That means I'm less open to experience than 21% of American 53-year-old American men. Okay, so what we're going to do is have you take this test of personality. Now, why is this important? Well, the crazy thing is it turns out that these personality traits actually have a genetic link. It turns out that when you compare people of differing genetic similarity on these traits, what you're going to find is that people who have more genetic similarity tend to score similarly on these tests. Okay, and so we're taking a very important, this is a popular test. It's a simplified way to think about personality. Your personality is an ocean. And this test is used in research all across psychology to look at adult personality and how it affects our life outcomes. So what I want you to do this week is to take this personality test. Now, we don't have time to talk about it, but on Thursday, I'm going to talk about judging the qualities of personality tests. The Big Five is a reliable, valid, standardized test with test norms. We're going to talk about what those qualities mean. And you're going to know those. If you don't come Thursday night, you need to go in the book and read about these properties of personality tests. We're going to talk about these properties of personality tests in the context of the Big Five. And we're going to talk about what that means for your adult personality. Now, over the course of the semester, we're going to keep coming back to personality. When we talk about health outcomes, life outcomes, happiness outcomes, marital outcomes, we're always going to talk about how personality affects these outcomes. So it is very important for you to have an idea of what psychologists mean when they're talking about measuring personality. Okay, that's all I have to say today. Does anybody have any questions? Timmy, Courtney, Iris. I want to thank everybody for doing a good job on the homework assignments this week. I want to thank you. A lot of you came to the webinar last Thursday night, and I want to thank you for that. We had good webinar attendance. Not as many people as I would have liked have signed up for Remind, but that's okay. Hopefully we'll get to 95% by the end of the semester. Do y'all have any questions for me? You're a very, very quiet audience. Some of my students like to type a lot in the chat bar, and sometimes I get quiet classes. You folks are one of those quiet, responsible groups. If you would, type in the chat bar one time just to let me know you're there, and then we're going to say goodbye for the day. It is 9:53. Okay. Well, hey, take care. You have a great day on purpose. Don't forget to do the personality test, and I look forward to seeing you Thursday night at 8 p.m. Take care.